For this project, I wanted to do editing, specifically animation, just because it was something that I had never done before, and I really wanted to learn how to do it. I had some characters in mind that I wanted to animate from previous drawings that I did when I was very sleep deprived, so I started off by making the characters. I don't know how to use Adobe Illustrator, so I created my chicken in Photoshop instead. I made the characters so all the body parts are separate and I can move them individually. I green screened the eyes so I can replace them later with moving ones. I wanted to use this character that I created when I was trying to learn Adobe Illustrator about a year ago, but because I didn't really know how to use it, I created it all in one layer, so I had to come up with a different way to animate it. I opened it in a Photoshop file and green screened the eyes as well, so I can replace those two. In After Effects, I started off by creating a composition with the dimensions that I wanted, and I started with the background. I created this with the 4-color gradient tool, and I added different colors that resembled a night sky. I wanted the sky to go from nighttime through sunrise all the way to daylight, so I created keyframes for the position of the points and the colors. For nighttime, I used an image of the stars from Google, and I used it as an overlay using the screen blending mode. After that, I have added a moon to the sky, which I also got from the internet, but I wanted it to be blue, so I have recolored it using hue and saturation. I have also made the moon move across the screen. To create a 3D effect, I have made a 2-node camera, and I've placed the layers in relation to the camera. As the sky turns from nighttime to daytime, I have made the moon go off screen. I carried on by adding some mountains to the shot, which I also got from the internet, but I have tinted it a dark blue to match the nighttime scene. When it turns to daytime, I have also recolored it to a lighter brown. Following that, I have added some hills and a road as a foreground to the shot, which I have also recolored, and I made the colors more blue using hue and saturation to match the nighttime feel. Again, as it turns to daytime, I have changed the colors back to their original. As the shot turns to daytime, I have also added a sun, which I have rotated around the centered anchor point. I've also added a tree to a shot, which my character will sit on. For the opening of my animation, I have also added a shooting star which moves across the screen, and I have rotated it so the line at the end matches the direction of its movement. I carried on by adding the owl to the shot, which I have also changed the colour of slightly just to make it a bit darker to fit the scene. I didn't want to make the owl completely blue because I wanted it to stand out from the shot. I wanted the owl to be asleep, so I added some snoring sound effects, and then it was time to animate. Since the owl was created all in one layer, I couldn't take it apart and move it individually, so I looked at a YouTube video on how to animate pictures. I found one which explained how to use the puppet tool, so I decided to use that for the owl. I have added pins to the character to where I wanted it to move, which I then keyframed to match the sound. I found the puppet tool quite easy to use, but I found that sometimes when I tried to stretch the ears, it also distorted the eye, which I didn't want. I found the hardest part to be animating the chicken, just because it was made of so many layers that I had to move individually. I watched a YouTube video about how to animate characters, in which the guy animated a dinosaur and he placed the anchor point at the bottom of the belly so that everything moves in relation to that. I did the same thing, but my character was a lot more complicated. His dinosaur was made of one core body and everything attached to that, whereas mine one was made of many parts, for example the neck, which had to move separately. The most difficult part was the neck because it was made of 3 different bits, which I had to keyframe individually. The problem was that I had made the neck out of 3 separate rectangles, so when I moved them you could see that they weren't actually attached. I didn't know how to make sure that the separate parts stuck together, so I created a separate composition for the head, which I have keyframed manually to stay attached to the top of the neck. I wanted the chicken to move its mouth as it's making the sound, so I have also keyframed that according to the sound effect which I was using. After having finished animating the movements of the chicken, I had realized that my composition wasn't big enough, and it cut off the top of his head when he stretched his neck out. I decided to go back to my composition and reduce the size of the chicken, but it made all the individual parts smaller based on their own anchor points. So I decided to just go with it. Finally, I have created the eyes of the 2 characters, starting with the eye of the owl, which was shut at first because he was sleeping. After that, I created a new document for the owl, which was the eye open, and I created the same one for the chicken, but in blue. Afterwards, I have used key light to remove the green and replace it with the eyes. After having tried using the puppet tool for the owl and animating individual body parts for the chicken, I have found that it's a lot easier to use the puppet tool. Looking back, it would have made a lot more sense to use the puppet tool for both characters because they were both in 2D, and I found it difficult and time-consuming to make the chicken stay intact. Especially when moving the neck, the technique that I used made it very clear that the neck was made of rectangles, and I found it difficult to make the animation look good because the head kept floating off and you could see the different parts that the neck was made of. Even though creating the animation was difficult, I'm quite happy with the outcome considering it's the first time that I've animated a character. Despite my chicken falling apart after every click, I think I'm getting the hang of creating the characters, what technique to use, and how to draw them in the first place so that they look good when they're moving. I think the experiment turned out good overall. I learnt a lot throughout the process and I would be really happy recreating the character and starting animating again, making sure to change all the things that didn't work this time. I would also like to keep experimenting with more camera movements in After Effects, but because the pictures that I got from the internet weren't really high resolution, it made it difficult to zoom in or move across. When I have the time, I would really like to create an animation when I create all of the aspects and not just the characters, because I would have more control over everything and less limitations.